While the Allies hated Japanese Banzai attacks for the sheer psychological shock and ferocity of it all, Japanese troops, on the other hand, hated the devastating accuracy of an Australian manned 25-pounder. Its high explosive and airburst barrages turned narrow trails into death traps and Banzai assaults into complete chaos. But the real story is actually much darker, and well, as you can imagine, once you were bracketed by a 25-pounder, far more gruesome. Okay, so let's go back and understand how and why this weapon came to be, and why Japanese soldiers learned to dread its distinctive crack echoing through the jungle. In the interwar years, the British faced a problem. Artillery doctrine was splitting into two camps: field guns for direct, flat trajectory fire, and howitzers for high-angle bombardment. But maintaining two separate weapon systems was expensive and logistically complicated. The solution? Combine them. Enter the Ordnance QF 25-pounder Mark II. The QF stood for quick firing, and it lived up to the name. This wasn't just a gun or just a howitzer. It was both. A gun howitzer that could fire at elevations from -5 degrees all the way up to 40 degrees. That versatility would prove critical in every theatre of World War II. The design was elegant. An 87.6mm bore firing a 25-pound high explosive shell, hence the name. The barrel sat on a revolutionary split-trail carriage with a circular firing platform underneath. This platform was genius. It allowed crews to rapidly traverse the gun through wide arcs by slewing the trails on the platform, crucial when you needed to shift fire quickly or defend against attacks from multiple directions. Development began in 1934, and by 1940, production was ramping up across the British Empire. But the British weren't the only ones building them. Australia knew war was coming to the Pacific, and they knew they couldn't rely solely on weapons shipped from Britain when U-boats controlled the sea lanes, so Australian factories began producing their own 25-pounders under license. The gun weighed about 1,800 kilograms in action, roughly 3,970 pounds. Portable enough to be towed by a truck, but heavy enough to be stable during rapid fire. And rapid fire was the key. A well-trained crew could maintain 6 to 8 rounds per minute sustained, with bursts up to 10 or 12 rounds per minute when needed. But the gun was only half the equation. The ammunition made it lethal. High explosive shells for general bombardment. Airburst rounds with time fuses that detonated above the target, showering fragments downward. Smoke rounds for screening movements. Illumination rounds for night fighting. And armor-piercing shot for direct-fire anti-tank work, though that was rarely needed in the Pacific. Each shell contained about 2 pounds of explosives, not massive compared to heavier artillery, but perfectly balanced for the gun's role. Enough punch to devastate infantry, light enough to maintain that high rate of fire. Commonwealth forces called it the 25. It became the backbone of their artillery doctrine, flexible, reliable, deadly. And then the Jungle War began. When Japan struck south in 1942, they hit with speed and ferocity. The Philippines fell, Singapore fell, the Dutch East Indies collapsed, and suddenly Japan was hammering at Australia's doorstep through New Guinea. Just quickly, before we continue, as always, we do our best to research and provide the best level of accuracy as we can in our videos. However, we know at times, well, we don't always get this right. And we also appreciate the pool of knowledge that sits with you, our viewers. So if you see or hear something in this video that you believe may not be 100% correct, then please share your views in the comments section below. And of course, if you would like to show your support to the channel, then please hit the like button and subscribe. We really appreciate it. Now back to the story. The Kokoda Track. A nightmare of mud, mountains, and malaria. A single-file path through some of the most hostile terrain on Earth. Steep ridges, dense jungle, no roads. Everything had to be carried. The Australian militia and infantry were fighting for their lives, outnumbered and outflanked. They needed artillery support desperately. But how do you get an 1,800-kilogram gun plus its carriage, ammunition, and crew up a mountain track where men could barely walk? You drag it up, with as many men as you can muster, through sheer determination. On 21st September 1942, 2 standard 25-pounders of the 14th Field Regiment were manhandled to Ower's Corner. From there, they fired over Imita Ridge onto Japanese positions at Ioribaiwa. For the first time in the campaign, Australian infantry had heavy artillery support. The Japanese, used to facing only mortars and light weapons, suddenly found themselves under accurate, sustained artillery fire. Their advance stalled. A 25-pounder crew operates like a machine. The gun commander receives coordinates from the forward observer. The layer adjusts elevation and traverse. The loader rams the shell home. The breech closes with a metallic clang. The firer pulls the lanyard. Crack, not a boom. A sharp, distinctive crack. The gun recoils, but that circular platform keeps it steady and allows the crew to slew the trails rapidly for wide traverse shifts. The breech opens automatically, ejecting the spent cartridge. Another round is already being loaded. 6 to 8 seconds later, another crack. And another. And another. By November, during the Australian counter-offensive at Oivi-Garari, the 2nd 1st Field Regiment had multiple guns supporting the advance. Forward observers were embedded with infantry units. Radio communications linked the guns to the front line, and now the tables had turned completely. The 25-pounder's true lethality wasn't just the shell itself, it was the system behind it. Australian gunners took a proven British Commonwealth method, pre-planned, pre-registered defensive fires, and adapted it ruthlessly to New Guinea's jungle, plotting trails and likely forming up points so barrages could be called in by code within seconds. Before any attack came, forward observers would map every approach, every trail, every likely forming up area. They'd measure exact ranges, calculate firing data, register the guns on reference points. Then they'd wait. When Japanese forces began their assault, often at night, relying on speed and shock, Australian observers would call a simple code: target reference point, number of rounds, and the guns would open fire on coordinates they'd already zeroed. The result was devastating precision. The first salvo catches the lead wave on a narrow approach. Shells detonate along a 50-metre stretch of trail. The pressure wave channels through the jungle corridor. Splintered timber becomes shrapnel. The lead squad is gone. The formation behind hesitates. 6 seconds. The second salvo lands. This one walks in, adjustments by tens of yards based on the observer's corrections. It hits the forming ranks, still moving forward. Men who moments ago were advancing with purpose now scramble for cover that doesn't exist. 6 seconds. The third salvo seals the route. The trail ahead is cratered. The trail behind is blocked. There's jungle on both sides, thick enough that you can't see 3 meters, let alone maneuver through it. And then the airburst begins. Gunners set time fuses by hand, tiny clockwork mechanisms adjusted in seconds under pressure. The shells detonate 20 to 30 feet above the trail. Fragments rain down in a cone pattern. Foxholes offer no protection. Logs offer no protection. The shockwave alone is enough to stun, to disorient, to break the momentum of an attack. Veteran accounts describe what this felt like. The first minutes of a set-piece barrage felt like the ground lifted. Orders vanished in the concussion. Formations simply came apart. At Milne Bay in August 1942, Australian 25-pounders combined with interlocking machine gun arcs repeatedly shattered the first wave of Japanese attacks. Follow-on lines meant to exploit the breakthrough instead found themselves climbing over wrecked ground with no momentum and nowhere to go. At Oivi-Garari in November, gunner Lloyd Birdsall and the 2nd 1st Field Regiment broke Japanese counterattacks before they could even reach Australian lines. Forward observers recall watching charges fold in on themselves. The trail jammed, men hesitating, cohesion gone. Australian gunners describe the radio calm during these engagements, corrections by tens of yards, then silence on the enemy net. The Americans noticed. By late 1942, US Marine and Army units at Guadalcanal and later Bougainville were adopting similar defensive fire planning. Pre-planned defensive fires, target reference points, box barrages that could seal off entire sectors. The Japanese adapted too, but not the way you'd expect. They didn't find a counter-tactic. They abandoned the tactic itself. Mass Banzai charges, which had terrified defenders across the Pacific, became rarer as 1943 wore on, not because of casualties alone, but because they couldn't survive pre-registered artillery. Japanese doctrine shifted towards smaller infiltration teams, night harassment, and dispersed attacks. Several Australian and US veterans later framed those early mass rushes as courage meeting a wall of planned fire. Japanese survivors, in post-war accounts, described the dread of illumination rounds followed by sudden bracketing, no cover on the track, only broken ground and confusion. Each high-explosive shell carried about 1.5 pounds of explosive, modest per round, but devastating in layered salvos and airbursts. When 8 of them land in a 50-meter pattern every minute, the effect compounds. The blast wave reflects off terrain. Fragments turn vegetation into secondary projectiles. And the psychological shock, the realization that you're caught in a pre-planned kill zone, breaks unit cohesion faster than the shells themselves. The Japanese had trained for night infiltration, for close combat, for overwhelming their enemies with speed and aggression. But you can't infiltrate through coordinates already plotted on a map. You can't charge through fire missions calculated hours before you even began moving. This was the reality of facing the 25-pounder. Not just a gun, a system, a doctrine, a killing pattern that turned jungle trails into mathematically defined death traps. The Japanese had their own artillery. The Type 94 75mm mounting gun fired a 13-pound shell, about half the 25-pounder's payload. Less explosive, less fragmentation, slower rate of fire at 4 to 5 rounds per minute. The Type 91 105mm howitzer had more power, but was heavy and difficult to maneuver in jungle terrain. The Japanese couldn't get enough artillery forward to match Commonwealth fire support. More critically, Japanese doctrine emphasized direct fire support in the attack. Their guns moved forward with the infantry, firing over open sights. The 25-pounder's flexibility, flat trajectory for direct fire or high angle for indirect bombardment, combined with pre-registered defensive fires gave Commonwealth forces a decisive advantage. The 25-pounder's greatest advantage was logistical. Each shell was self-contained, projectile and cartridge case in one unit. No separate powder charges to manage. This simplified ammunition handling and reduced loading time. Commonwealth forces had streamlined 25-pounder ammunition production across the empire. Australia manufactured shells domestically, supply chains were shorter, and artillery crews were extensively trained. Fire direction centres calculated targeting solutions quickly, forward observers embedded with infantry learned to coordinate effectively, and radio communications prioritised artillery coordination. A 6-man crew could have a 25-pounder in action in under 2 minutes. They could shift fire between targets in seconds. They could maintain sustained fire for hours if ammunition held out. This wasn't just about the gun. It was about trained crews operating within an integrated fire support system. At Yorubaiwa Ridge in September and the counter-offensive at Oivi-Garari in November, the 25-pounder proved decisive. Japanese forces that had swept through Southeast Asia found themselves halted by Australian infantry backed by accurate artillery fire. When the Japanese concentrated for major attacks, artillery broke up their formations. When they tried to outflank positions, pre-registered fire zones turned trails into killing grounds. When they attacked at night, illumination rounds lit up the darkness and airburst shells shattered the assault. By November 1942, the Japanese were in retreat. The tide had turned. And while many factors contributed, the courage of Australian infantry, Japanese supply difficulties, air support, the 25-pounder had been there at every critical moment. The 25-pounder's story extended far beyond the Pacific. It had proven itself in North Africa at Tobruk and El Alamein, where Commonwealth gunners hammered Rommel's Africa Corps. It served in Italy, northwest Europe after D-Day, and Burma. Australia introduced the short 25-pounder in 1943 for jungle warfare. Lighter, sectional, air-portable, used in later New Guinea operations and throughout the Pacific theatre. After World War II, the 25-pounder fought in Korea, proving as reliable in brutal cold as it had been in tropical heat. It served with Commonwealth forces for decades. Some guns remained in service into the 1980s. Australian veterans called it the gun that never let us down. High praise from men who depended on it for survival. In the desperate fighting of 1942, when Australia's fate hung in the balance, the 25-pounder delivered. Not with flashy technology, not with overwhelming size, but with accuracy, reliability, and crews who knew how to use it. From Tobruk to Kokoda, from El Alamein to Oivi-Garari, the 25-pounder wasn't just artillery, It was the Commonwealth's answer to impossible odds. A weapon built for range and precision that earned respect the hard way. Japanese troops learned to fear that distinctive crack, that rising scream of incoming shells, that moment of realization that they were bracketed, targeted, and about to experience the full fury of a weapon that could rain death from kilometers away. The QF 25-pounder, quick-firing, versatile, and absolutely devastating when it mattered most. One round at a time. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time.